Well, officially, good morning and welcome, and we are glad you're with us. If you have a Bible with you, we'd encourage you to churn it to Genesis chapter 50, and that's going to be kind of our launching point today. And God's going to do some good things, I believe, this morning. Genesis 50 is kind of the end. It's the last chapter of Genesis, and for the previous 13 to 17 chapters, somewhere in that range, I don't remember exactly, it would be following the story of Joseph. And so I'm just going to summarize the story of Joseph really quickly for us, and then get to where we're actually going. So Joseph has all those dreams. He's got a whole mess of brothers, and he ends up, long story short, getting sold into slavery, and then getting falsely accused, and then getting thrown into prison, and then getting completely forgotten about in prison. And this is about a 13-year time span where literally his life is just like falling apart. And then eventually he rises to become basically the vice president of Egypt, equivalent of the vice president of Egypt, vice pharaoh of Egypt. I don't think that position exactly existed, but and he ends up saving all of his family and many, many, many other people from a terrible famine. That is like the super Cliff Notes version of the story of Joseph. But I share that to say we're going to get to this point in Genesis chapter 50, where Joseph is talking to his brothers. His brothers are the one that started this whole thing. And so in Genesis chapter 50, beginning in verse 15, it says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?" So they sent word to Joseph, saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father." When the message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. Ironic little shift of things, seeing as how they are the ones that sold him into slavery. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. I really want to key in on that phrase that Joseph used, what you intended for harm, God intended for good. You know, one of the beautiful things about serving a sovereign God, sovereign meaning God is the one who's like over everything. He is, you know, maybe the simplified version is God is in control, right? It's more complicated than that simple version, but that's kind of the simple version of the sovereignty of God is you know, God being the one who's over and above everything, and he's accomplishing things when we see chaos. And so Joseph, if you think about it, for 13 years he was sitting there in a prison, being falsely accused, in slavery, in these various very trying circumstances. And for 13 years, he didn't know at all what God was doing behind the scenes. And so 13 years later, he's finally able to look in the rearview mirror and say, "Oh, okay, I see it now. You intended to harm me, but God actually had his hand through this and is intending it for good." Great reversal. I love how God just loves to take the works of Satan and just turn them on their head and be like, "Yeah, beat you again." But I want to talk about this in relationship to what we're all going through with the coronavirus, and saying, like, you know, we maybe aren't able to see what God's doing right now, but we serve a sovereign God. We serve a God who is really at work and doing things behind the scenes that we might not see for who knows how much time. And I kind of wanted to talk about this a little bit today because I really want to share a resource with you. And it's a resource that I heard about, and it's from somebody who I have a tremendous amount of respect for. And how he wrote a book this quickly is beyond me, but he's written a lot of books. And so it's John Piper, and he wrote a book called Coronavirus and Christ. And it's, I haven't read it yet, but I'm going to be. And the cool thing about it, one of the cool things, is that it is a free download. And he also did a audio reading of it himself. I love John, super humble guy. He probably spent a lot of time doing that audio recording, and he's doing it for free. And there's a lot of things about John that I have so much respect for. Anyways, free audiobook, free ebook. It's not coming out on paper yet because things on paper take time. But I'm going to share right now to this in the comments section just the link to it. In theory. There it is. So from the Faith EPC site right now, you're going to be seeing a link, and that's to the Desiring God website, which is the organization that John Piper heads up. And on that link, you can download it as a PDF, which would be the simple version for just pulling up on your web browser or anything like that. There's a couple of more complex ways of doing that if you're using like a Kindle or a iPad or something like that. There's some different file types. If you're not using a fancy reader, just do the PDF if you're wanting to read it. Or there's the MP3 file, which MP3 is an audio file. And so use the audio file if you're wanting to read it. And I pulled it up. It's about a 2-hour listen if you're going to listen to John Piper read it. It's just a good book. I kind of just read a review on it so far. I haven't read it personally yet. But it's a good book on just reflecting upon God's faithfulness through this time. And so you can download it on your phone and just, as you're going through your day, whatever you might be doing, just, have John Piper reading to you and and getting some good encouragement of what does it look like from Christ's eyes, from God's eyes, going through a pandemic like this, and how can we find our peace and our security in Him and in His sovereignty.
Right.
So, really encouraging you. Use that as a cool resource. Amazing. And I love that they just made it free. It speaks a little bit to the heart that they have for the church. They're not trying to turn a quick buck. They're trying to help people grow in Jesus. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Something that I talk about a lot with the Young Explorers, which is our Young Girls Adventure Group. We have 10 girls who get together and do crafts or go on day trips out places. We oftentimes talk about a tapestry because I understand that a lot of people fall away from the faith when bad things happen because they don't understand how God can be sovereign over that. And so we talk about a tapestry as God weaving our lives, and if you were to take a single line across a tapestry, the color would be constantly changing. And if you were walking along that line, you wouldn't understand all the different changes. You wouldn't understand what was going on. All that you would see was a change. But as you step back and look at the whole picture, the whole tapestry, you can look how the artist wove together all of these different colors and the different patterns beautifully to make it design. And so we talk about that a lot, and I just see that with this. We don't actually see the whole picture here. We don't know everything that God is weaving together with all of this. We just know that He is good and that He has His hand over it all.
Right. Yeah, and so that, it just relates to, since this whole coronavirus has started, I'll be honest, I have heard very little from some of the typical prosperity gospel sources, because oftentimes they struggle with having any sort of what is called a theology of suffering, which is how is God good in the midst of when things aren't going perfectly and beautifully. in our own idea of what perfect and beautiful is. And so, perhaps this is a good time to exercise and flex those muscles a little bit to say, like, how is God good when chaos is happening?
Right. And to learn how to continue to worship him in our suffering.
Yeah.
And, Joseph's 13 years of suffering, he continued to worship God and he continued to lean in on him.
Yeah.
And that is not, that's not really in our human nature to do that.
Right.
I was reading 2 Corinthians today, the very end, and it talks about suffering. It says, and then the notes in my Bible say, suffering this extreme may seem foreign to believers who have found lives of relative comfort in many parts of the world in the 21st century. However, the reality of suffering for the cause of Christ continues today, whether in cultures where the worship of Jesus is outlawed or in nations where Christianity is embraced. The possibility of suffering for one's faith remains. Believers should not be surprised when they face suffering of any kind, but should recognize that their suffering places them in good company. And I think, too, even for this coronavirus and our separation from our church family, to throw us into prayer for the people who are in countries where Christianity is not allowed. We aren't allowed right now to gather as a church for a short time, but there are people who that reality is their existence. That's every day. There isn't an end time in sight. We have, we don't have an end time in sight that we know of, but we know it will end. And we have brothers and sisters in China and Afghanistan and Uzbekistan, all over the world, who that is their reality every day. So instead of being frustrated and feeling down on ourselves, having that throw us into prayer for our brothers and sisters.
Yeah, absolutely.